Hello, my name is Michael Fernandez. I am the founding director of the Center for Scientific Evidence in Public Issues, or the EPI-Center, at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The AAAS is the world's largest general scientific society with more than 120,000 members and 200 affiliate societies. The AAAS has been advancing science, engineering, and innovation throughout the world for the benefit of all people for more than 150 years. As the publisher of the Science family of journals and through science policy programs like the Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, which have placed nearly 3,500 scientists in congressional offices and federal agencies, and the EPI-Center. Our mission is to deliver clear, concise, and actionable scientific evidence to policymakers and other decision makers at the local, state, and federal levels. Now, we know that scientific evidence is only one factor in any policymaking process. And our goal is to make it easier for policymakers to access scientific evidence and then integrate that evidence into their decision-making processes. Over the past year and a half, we've been working to understand what decisions local policymakers are facing and how we can provide information that can be useful. And one of our first initiatives was actually a meeting with Missouri state policymakers, which we co-organized with the Missouri Science and Technology Policy Initiative. We're big supporters of the MOST Policy Initiative, and I'd like to thank Rachel Owen and MOST for giving us the opportunity to talk to you today and to thank you for watching. Last year, we launched our first project on election security and voting technology. Through this initiative, we provided tailored information to more than 875 state and local election officials across 10 states. Now, in all this work, we had three primary messages. First was the need to replace outdated and insecure electronic voting machines that do not provide a voter verifiable paper record. We also urged states to adopt more scientifically sound audits known as risk limiting audits. And we wanted to share the overwhelming evidence that online voting is not secure. Now, these messages are backed by decades of scientific research, including the National Academy of Sciences' groundbreaking 2018 report, Securing the Vote, Protecting American Democracy. And now, as vote by mail expands in response to the coronavirus pandemic, we are also advising on accessibility for disabled voters and others who may need additional options to vote securely, independently, and privately. In early April, we sent a letter to governors, state election directors, and secretaries of state, signed by more than 70 experts, including internet pioneers and intelligence experts, asking them not to permit online voting and instead to consider other more secure alternatives to in-person voting. Recommendations included expanding early voting to permit voters to cast their ballots safely and securely while social distancing. We also encouraged officials to consider expanding vote by mail or absentee voting. Now, historically, the rates of fraud using any method of voting are extremely low, and there is no evidence linking vote by mail to increased fraud. In fact, in several states, including Colorado, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Hawaii, they have extensive experience with vote by mail for most voters with no indication of increased incidence of fraud. And in these and other states, evidence also indicates that vote by mail does not favor one party over another. Vote by mail is not without its challenges, though. There are problems with voters making errors, not signing their ballots, or with signatures that don't match those on file. Voters also have to return ballots on time. In Missouri, for example, most absentee ballots require notarization, so instructions to voters have to be clear. And when voting in person at polling places, undervotes or overvotes are often caught, and the voter can correct their ballot, but that is more difficult when ballots are mailed. All of this is to say that as states, including Missouri, expand vote by mail options, voter education is critical. And creating the right expectations going into November will also be very important. Election results will take longer. We all need to set public expectations that a delay in certifying results is expected. We may not have results for days or even weeks, when there are close elections in jurisdictions with many mail-in votes. Now, there's generally widespread support for vote by mail among both Republican and Democratic voters, although there is some partisan divide in public opinion. In 29 states and the District of Columbia, voters have the option to cast the ballot by mail without needing to document an excuse. In 16 other states, a reason is required to vote absentee, but 11 of these have already announced changes to eligibility requirements because of COVID-19. Now, I do want to touch briefly on another method of voting to avoid large gatherings of people at polling places on election day, which is internet voting. Now, the scientific evidence regarding internet and voting app systems is remarkably clear. They're simply not secure. Everyone from the ACLU to the Heritage Foundation agrees. The risks are just too great. Online voting systems are just as vulnerable to malware and other forms of malicious attacks as other computer systems. These systems are also always vulnerable to coding errors or other unintentional disruptions, as we saw in Iowa earlier this year. And it is technically extremely difficult to both authenticate voters' identities and protect their privacy. Voting online is unlike shopping or banking because the transaction, how you voted, must remain secret. And there is no acceptable rate of loss as there is with online commerce. If a ballot is changed or lost, there is no way it can be recovered. In May, the FBI, the Election Assistance Commission, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, and the Department of Homeland Security all got together and warned states that return of marked ballots online was high risk. For voters with a disability for whom computer-based voting systems can provide important ballot access, there are more secure offline remote systems that keep data private while still allowing voters to use assistive technology. There are several commercially available systems that keep the ballot and vote selection data on the voter's computer during the entire process, reducing privacy and security risks. Now, finally, I'd like to turn to our last issue, paper ballots and audits. The science here is also very clear. Paper ballots, marked either by hand or machine, are the most effective way to ensure that the votes cast in an election reflect voters' intent. Voters should be able to verify their choices before casting their ballot. And when every vote creates a paper trail that is routinely audited in a statistically sound method, it also provides the public with assurances that votes have been tabulated correctly. Routine audits of votes before the results are certified offers transparency to the candidates and the public that the result is correct. And this is especially important in close elections. Now, risk-limiting audits are designed to provide statistical evidence of whether the outcome of the election is accurate with a high level of confidence. Unlike traditional audits that check a fixed percentage of ballots, RLAs use a statistically valid method to randomly select and audit a prescribed number of ballots. An initial random sample of ballots is examined based on the margin of victory, the projected margin of victory in an election, the total numbers of cast ballots, and a predetermined level of certainty that the audit will detect an incorrect outcome. If necessary, additional ballots can be examined until there is statistical support for the accuracy of the election outcome. Now, this process is relatively straightforward, but it does require advanced preparation. You need valid paper ballots to start with, although those are the norm in most Missouri counties. And it does require some special handling, organizing, and storage of ballots. But fortunately, there are resources at the disposal of election officials who may be considering running a risk-limiting audit pilot. Shane Schuller, the county clerk in Greene County, actually ran an RLA pilot last year, and I'm sure he'd be available for consultation. And organizations like Voting Works and former Colorado election official Jennifer Morell, who piloted the use of RLAs, are helping jurisdictions around the country run RLAs. Now, in all our work over the past year and a half, it is clear that county election officials around the country continue to do their best to run safe, secure, and fair elections. In this challenging environment, their job is even more difficult, And that is why we also support sustained funding for our local election officials to secure complex systems and adapt to unprecedented circumstances. Thank you very much for being here today.